All right, and we're live. So what you got to say
So,
for us, Julian?
so Tony, why does Jahadi White like Oreos so much?
Why did Jahidi White like Oreo so much? Shit, I don't know.
Because he liked to get dunked on by everybody.
Go Canada.
Put on a suit, drink water, don't drink and drive. Hey man, call your mother.
It means nothing. It means nothing.
Nah, they lying to you. It's about the money.
Now you're more fluent.
So what's up? Give us
what's
the introduction.
What's up, guys? Today is May 27th, 2025. On today's day in NBA history, Dr. J won the 1981 final, not final, regular season MVP, and he becomes the first person in ABA and NBA history to both win the MVP in respective leagues. And I kind of want to go and dive into our topic for today is talking about the MVP race and talking about contested, who is more deserving, who is undeserving, and so on and so forth. So I kind of want to establish a criteria, but I want to first define the definition of what is valuable when it comes to valuability in the NBA. What do you think is the most valuable thing to be a valuable player for a league?
So, well, I want to go with this is so how can we break this down? So there's three things I think that really matter to me on the MVP. And one of them they say doesn't matter at all. But the three things that really matter to me is one, your stats. You know, how good are your stats? Because I think we could separate MVPs really every year with the statistical MVP and the actual MVP. I think a lot of times it'll line up, but I think obviously there'll be some variance and all that. So I think your stats because it shows what you're producing on the court. Nothing drives me nuts more than a motherfucker telling me the stats don't matter. Anybody tells me the stats don't matter, I go, well, scoring shows who wins or loses the game. So we judge who wins or loses on a stat. Clearly, the stats matter.
Mhm.
So there's the statistics. There's winning. Obviously, I think obviously in a perfect world, the MVP would lead the team to the most wins, the title that year, and have the best stats. And then there's just no argument. So it's winning, and then finally for me, it's what you do in the playoffs. I know it's a regular season award, but we'll look at like 2007 when the Mavs got bounced in the first round. Many voters said they had regret voting for Dirk after they got bounced in the first round because while it is a regular season award, you're supposed to translate that regular season award into some traction, things like that. But I also too look at it like as well as let's say you do get bounced in the early round, something like that. But are you getting bounced by the eventual champ? Because if you get bounced by the champ, you can argue you're the second best team in the league.
Right.
The only person that can beat us is the team that won the title. Other than that, I don't feel anybody can beat us. You look at I don't know, the '95 Jazz, for example. They lost 3-2 to the Rockets in the first round. The Spurs didn't push them to the maximum of the game. The Magic got swept. So we put up a way better. I know we lost in the first round, Orlando, but we didn't have the same road as you. We played the champs in the first round. When you played the Rockets, you lost too. So
Mhm.
so that's what matters to me. I look at it in those three ways. I don't know what matters to you.
I'm in I think in the extreme minority when it comes to this because typically when I try to argue valuability, um, I try to argue in the sense of most valuable player on the best team, and I'm with you on that. Where I will argue for the pushback is where the stats can go into it, and I can get behind that to an extent. But where I find the valuability in somebody is that are they affecting their teams in more favorable situations than another? And for example, the first kind of I guess topic that I would like to talk about is I think probably the most famous or infamous one, depending on how you look at it, is the whole Steve Nash conversation in '05 and '06.
Well, wait
And
before we get into the whole Steve Nash, though, I want to ask you because are you like a stickler on it should always be the best player on the best team?
I think there's there's certain times in which that isn't the case, and I think that that's fair. But I'm more of the guy who will benefit or will argue best player on best team, and if there's a marginal kind of gap there, I think that's fine. But
The reason
if
why I
you
ask is I'll use this for example is so like I'm big on the best player on the best team, right? And I think that's a good general rule to follow.
Mhm.
Like this year, but see, like this year, for example, we'll just use like I can't fault them if they voted Jokic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
A 30-point triple double, shooting damn near 60%. I can't fault them if they do that. I understand the Shea argument. They won 68 games or whatever it was. So yeah, that's cool. Either way, I'm cool with either one on that. But we'll use like what's a good one? 2006. The Pistons win 64 games that year. Is Chauncey Billups, should he have been the MVP of the league at 19-8?
and that's where I find the argument, like specifically in that year.
Mm-hmm.
I think the argument should have been, instead of more the totality of the wins, because you can easily make the argument, like I understand that the stats behind that is, yes, Chauncey is on a 60-win team, but obviously the expectation was that they would be one of the better teams out of the East. And does a replacement level player give you the same stats as Chauncey Billups? I can't say that, but I can say that the totality of the team is great. So if you take Chauncey off, do they still win 64 games? My argument is they're probably still a 50-win team at minimum, because the East at that time isn't as great as most other Eastern conferences in totality. But I do understand the argument about the wins and the stats and best player on best team if you're in the respective conference. So I understand that argument completely.
Well, I think too, if you look at the jump, like the previous years before them, they won 54 wins, in 05 and
Yes.
04. And so like a 64 win to 54 win jump is like astronomical. Normally a 54 win team is not going to win a title. A 64 win team is going to have much better odds at winning a title. You start getting to like historic greatness, once you start getting up around those numbers, because now you're getting like right around the 80% win mark. We're at 4 out of every 5 games you're winning, and things like that. So yeah, I just want to know like how staunch you were on it, because some people are extremely rigid on it. Do you have flexibility, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm flexible about it, to simply answer the question. Yes.
Right. Okay. So well, let's get into it. So you want to talk about Steve Nash and these MVPs?
Yes, and where, if my question is more like, knowing that you're a Suns fan, but taking the fandom out of it, do you think that he still deserved those 2 MVPs compared to somebody else? Because the most notable name that's always brought up, and I don't like it, is Kobe. And you argued the stats, and for that year, you can make the argument that, okay, he put up these stats because of the fact that he didn't have comparable players. But when I have this conversation with other players or other people, I specifically say Dirk Nowitzki should have probably been number 2, and because I believe he was a part of a 60-win team, putting a 50, 40, 90 season, and so on and so forth. So I usually say Dirk, and people kind of scoff me off, and I'm like, well, he's on a 60-win team, so that gives you better chances to go and win the championship, putting up an efficient season, and being a part of. I still believe he was either best or a top 3 offense in that league. So at the time, so to me, that's equally as valuable as somebody like Steve Nash.
Oh man, I mean, if we're really doing this, like if I had a vote, in the MVP or whatever, and I don't know, I don't have a vote, but maybe I would be thinking, since Kobe's killing it statistically wise and things like that. But then again, I don't even think Kobe necessarily was killing it statistically wise. I mean, because if you look at the assists and rebounds are like 5 and 5, and like 1.8 steals. He just scored a lot of points, really, and he still shot 45%. So he didn't kill it from there. And then if you look at the stat scoring efficiency ratio, where you take up all the points that you could score based off all your shot, add up all your twos, add up all your threes, add up all your free throws, the possibility of points you could score, Kobe that season could have scored like 71.1 points with the amount of shots he was taking, and he only scored 35.4. So he didn't even cash in on half of his scoring opportunity, and that's including with the free throw line. So when I look at it like that, and then I look at, like, their 45 wins and all that, and this is 06. I mean, just remember in the 06 season, like I do. I mean, I would have Nash over him. I'd have Dirk over him. I'd have LeBron over him. I'd have Wade over him. I'd have Brand over him. I'd have Billups over him. And Duncan, they won 60 games too. I'd probably have Duncan over him. So that's where I would have Kobe in this. I'm completely baffled by it. They went, what'd they go, 45-37. They were a 7th seed. Like I said, I always argue this to anybody that says, and I don't know if you've heard me ever argue this, anybody that ever argues that Kobe's the 2nd greatest player of all time. And I go, well, let's look at these facts, okay? Because if I told you a team was missing 3/5 of their starting lineup, a team was up 3-1, a team had the 2nd greatest player of all time, a team had the greatest coach of all time, and the 2nd greatest player's 2nd best player was outperforming the other team's 2nd best player, would you say they'd win the series? And they go, yes. And then I go, well, let's break it down. Were the Suns missing 3/5 of their starting lineup throughout that series? Yes. Everything comes true, except when we get to Kobe being the 2nd greatest. So I think it's the fandom of people trying to elevate Kobe into that 2nd slot, that 3rd slot, that 5th slot. You know what I mean? To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever seen Kobe 4th. I've always seen everybody's like, he's 1, 2, 3, 5th,
or 5,
7th, 8th. You know what I mean? But I don't think anybody's got. I've never seen anybody get a 4th. But anyway, I think it's to elevate him somewhere that he's not meant to be because of the fandom with it. You enjoyed watching him play. You like the competitiveness, you like the ego, you like the work ethic, and like if I was building a basketball player, I would take Kobe's work ethic. I would definitely take that. I'd drop everything fucking else. You know what I mean? But I definitely would want his work ethic. So with that being said, that's where I think it is. Do I think Nash deserved the MVP that year in 06, and then we can go to 05? I do think he did it because of all the injuries they had, the in and out, the signing people, and it was just at one point too in that season they started off poorly. I don't remember exactly what they started off with, but they had a stretch where they went like 38-12 through the bulk of like 50 games. They lost like 5 out of the first 9, adjusting to no Amari. Then they ripped off, and they went like 30. And then when they tried to incorporate Amari in, that threw off the rhythm for a while. I think they went like, I don't know, like 12-11 down the stretch or something like that. But when they were really rocking and rolling for like a 50-game stretch, they were looking like one of the best teams in the league. And if you look at like the 06 conference finals with the Mavericks, the games Raja Bell were actually able to finish, the Suns won those games. It's the games he wasn't able to finish, they didn't win. So with that being said, do I think Nash deserved the MVP? Yeah. If like somebody gave it to Dirk or somebody else, like would I argue? No, I wouldn't. I think if we had revisionist history again, we'd probably give it to Wade.
And that's fair.
And because that's where it comes into the I know it's a regular season award, but we really ultimately give a fuck what they do in the playoffs.
And people start to elevate people in the playoffs because they value the playoffs so much. So we have these conversations to elevate them during the season, and it's very hard to kind of go against this revisionist history, because I was having this conversation not about an MVP, but just the greatest kind of like teams, and how was Rajon Rondo viewed in 2008? And the narrative was he was a young point guard having 3 eventual Hall of Fame talents around him, and how is he going to manage the egos between 3 guys who are number 1 options on their respective teams? And people elevate him because they won a championship on a historic defense, and they elevate him to, well, he's a top 5 point guard that year. If you look at it, statistically, he wasn't a top 5 point guard. He was barely a top 10. He could have been a top 15. But because of his impact being so important, he
Are you talking about 2008?
2008 when the Celtics won.
I mean, he wasn't a top 20 point guard in 2008.
And that's what I mean, is that the revisionist history that these people want to elevate these point guards or these guys specifically to go up. because of the postseasons, because of the moments, that nostalgia, it's weird to me, and I don't understand why a lot of people do it. I do. It's
Did
just
Rondo have a man at no eight?
I don't think so. I can't name you it, and that's why I've asked you that. I've asked people that before. It's like, what definitively makes him a top 5 point guard, and it's like people fail to give me the examples, and it's like, that's what I mean. You go by stats, that's not top 10, and you go by moments, he doesn't have many moments.
Well, I mean, if you go by accolades, you go by winning, you go by anything.
Right.
You know, because I mean, at best he's the 4th best player on a title team, and that's at absolute best. And I don't know if he's even that.
Right. So it's very weird, but it's just an example that I wanted to bring up. But if
I want to say this too. In 05-06 though, about like the Nash thing too. Yeah. If you look at the Suns, you know, in those 2 years he won the title, there's something like, and I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something like, there's something like 2-11 when he doesn't play, or something like that, right? And no, it might be 2-9, I think is what they are. They're 2-9. Okay, that's an 18% win percentage when he doesn't play. They can't win when he doesn't play. Then if you look at, and a lot of Kobe fans argue this, and you know, I don't know if you've argued this ad nauseum yet, but I have. You know, about the 05-06, they show like what Kobe was on the court and off the court, right? You know, and how they were like, I don't know, top 3. They were basically a couple points below the Suns' offense when Kobe was on the court, but then they were like one of the worst offenses ever when Kobe Bryant was off the court. You know, have you ever seen those?
Yes, and they fail to mention that in the amount of minutes in which he is off the court, they're a bad offense, but it's only for a finite amount of minutes. Correct?
Well, what they really fail to not do, which I really hate, is when that on off goes to the playoffs, when you're able to play, you know, nothing but good teams, you're able to focus in. Kobe's on off court. So Kobe's on court, his offensive rating, they were 105 when Kobe was on the court in the playoffs. In the playoffs, their offensive rating was 119 when he was off the court, which means he was a -14. So anybody that wants to argue Kobe Bryant over Nash, that is the only argument I need. You didn't win more games. You couldn't beat him. Your team was healthy. You had better coaching. You had the better co-star. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying the Suns were. And what kills me is people like to look at the names of the Suns and all that. And like someone that lives in Phoenix watched every game, watched every minute of it. I'm not gonna say every minute. I mean, sometimes I get caught up, but especially in those Nash years, you know, I mean, that was must-watch TV. I can't tell you how many relationships we broke up. You know what I mean? Because, like for example, one of my ex-girlfriends, her kid was having a recital. I said, "Fuck that! I want to watch the game." And it turns out it was the double overtime Nets Suns game. That was like 151 to 154, something like that. I don't know if you guys ever watched it. It's in November of 06, I want to say. One of the best regular season games of all time. Please go watch it if you don't get the chance. Jason Kidd and Steve Nash are just unbelievable in that game. You know, 2 of the best point guards of all time, just going at it. You know, and then you got like, you know, wing scores like Carter playing well, shit like that. You know, Mari, just the whole thing. But yeah, like I mean, I'm missing kids' recitals and women are getting pissed off because I'm not going to miss the game. Right. So watching it, the collection only worked if Nash was in there. So the best analogy I would think is like this: if you think of a chocolate chip cookie, you know, you think of dough, you think of chocolate chips, you think of whatever you think of. You know what I mean? It all sounds good. It doesn't work without sugar. Make cookies without sugar and see how good they are. You're not gonna like them. That's what Nash did. He is what galvanized them to win. So do I think he deserved it? Yeah, absolutely. At least that's an 06 before we get into the 05. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that point up too. So if you ever see the Kobe argument, anybody out there to tell you about how historically Kobe's great and all that kind of shit, he deserved it over Nash. Just bring up the playoff numbers, and then I don't know, it'll be something different because then they argue the finite amount of minutes when he's off the court. Then it switches. It'll always switch.
It always switch. I agree. And I to me, out of those 2 years, I think the 06 is way more of a argument that people try to bring up more than 05. I think definitively out of the 2 years, I think he deserved it more in 05. And you can make the argument. I believe Shaq was number 2 in 05, correct?
Mhm.
So I can understand that argument, but I think he just definitely has a stronger argument in 05. But to kind of switch gears, because in trying to do research and trying to look at narratives and like voting totals and stuff like that, one of the big things that went off to me is the striking shortened season in '99. It was Malone, it was Alonzo Mourning, and Tim Duncan in '99. So you're only playing. So there's 3 teams definitively who are winning 37 games, 36 games, and they have a profound impact in the third of the less games. How can we quantify who is going to be the most valuable with having 30 less games played?
No, I agree with that. And that goes back into the playoff thing, like looking back
Mhm.
on it after the season, because here's what people don't realize too about the Spurs that year. So the Spurs started off that year 6-8. Okay. Then they finished 37-13. So that means they go 31-5. Then they go 15-1. So that's
Mhm.
46. That's 46-6 down the stretch, including playoffs.
Yeah.
23-3, that if you break that out, so that means for every 7.5 games, they lost one, basically.
Mhm.
So with that being said, by the numbers, not the raw numbers or whatever, because we like round numbers, the double-double is going to look better on Duncan. But by the numbers, Malone had the better season. He had more win shares. He had the higher win share per 48 and all that. I personally, at the time, after it, I liked Zoe. I liked Zoe better with the double-double. They had one.
Right.
They got bounced the first round and stuff. Plus, with the 4 blocks, Zoe is by far. I don't think he gets enough credit. I mean, I make defensive lists on like my all-time. I think he's a top 10 defender of all time at his peak. So, yeah. So yes, I understand, and especially not knowing in '99, not knowing Duncan was going to win the title second year, things like that. Malone was the safe bet as well. They had, they went 35-15. So with that being said, I don't trip as much on the Malone thing, but when you factor in what I said, when you look at postseason success, it's clearly Duncan. It's clearly Duncan because you want your MVP of the year to lead the team to a title. And I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to tell you right now, that's the narrative you want. You want the MVP of the fucking league to lead the team to the title that year. Am I wrong?
No, I'm with you, because when I try to define valuability, it should be can he lead you to a championship or not? And that's why I get a lot of pushback from these past several years. People who are 6 seeds who are winning MVP. I argue that team, that person can't win the championship because they're a 6 seed.
Unless you're a king.
Unless you're Hakeem. It's it's a finite amount of time of you're the best player on a 6 seed winning you a championship. So it's very it's odd. But my point is more being like, what if we're saying that Duncan deserved it because of the postseason success, I get behind that. I think I wouldn't say he was robbed, because I think we saw robbed so like out there now. But I would have leaned towards Duncan if we're factoring the playoff success as well. But if I go to Zoe, because I established I'm a big 2-way guy. Karl Malone was definitely an all defensive guy that year. But again, give me Tim Duncan and give me Alonzo Mourning. Again, at their peaks, I think they're just better defensively than Karl Malone.
Not even think. It's just they just are better defensively than Karl Malone. Karl Malone has no rim protection. Not only that, people don't realize this about Karl Malone. Karl Malone was, for lack of a better term, with what he had to work with, like with his body, his speed, his size, his strength, his height. Karl Malone was really kind of a terrible rebounder for what he had to work with too. He was a great position rebounder. Like if the ball came to him, he'd get it, but he wasn't going to go after the ball. He was going to basically stand in one spot. If the ball came to him, great. It didn't. That's why, like in his peak years, he's not even averaging a double. I don't think he even averaged a double-double in his 97 season when he won the – I certainly know he didn't do it in 99. But I don't even think he averaged double-double in 97.
I don't think so either. That's something I would have to, check again, but I know 99 for sure he didn't.
Hold on, I'm gonna look it up right now just to make sure I read it. Yeah, Karl Malone was 9.9 in
yeah,
in
right.
97.
So, and like you said, people like round numbers, so they'll just always round up, but it's not 10.
Well, right.
But if we're going by that again, I think Tim Duncan deserved it. But I think one of the most interesting ones, and it's almost apparent for today, mentioning SGA and Jokic, was this whole. I think people easily forget that I don't think that this narrative has ever gone away about valuability. Is the first time in doing my research about this for the past week that I was able to see it post 81, when it was more the media voting than the players, was Barkley versus Magic in 89 and 90. Because the narrative was, yes, Charles Barkley is only leading the 50 wins, but if you look at the raw stats on Charles Barkley, other than assists, he's beating him in every other category. So where does this narrative that people use now of the value of like the offense and the engine of somebody compared to the best player on the best team, like a Barkley Magic in that year, where do people find that being a credible kind of resource to use when they take out, the on-off numbers and stuff like that?
That I don't really know. I do know this. The first time I really heard about the 1990 MVP voting, because I was sporadically watching the NBA at that time. The 89-90 season, I was in kindergarten. So, I knew much about basketball as a kindergartner knew.
Right.
Like I knew the main players, and I'd watch a few games and shit, but like this wasn't an in-depth thing. So really looking at it, I had no idea who was winning MVPs or anything like that. But a couple of years later, Barkley writes his autobiography. And if anybody hasn't read Barkley's autobiography, it is an awesome read. You know what I mean? I used to go back and read that on the regular and shit as a kid. So so he was arguing that he deserves it. And for a long time, I thought he did deserve it because of what he said and all that. But when I was doing my revisionist history, like really going in deep into it, personally, who I think really deserved the MVP that year was Jordan in 90.
And I think he came in third.
Yeah, he comes in third. He wins 55 games, which they go further than Magic because the Suns beat Magic in 5 that year. Jordan's 34, 7, 6. What's he got? 3 steals a game, 0.7 blocks. He's shooting better from the field than Magic. They're shooting about the same, each about 38%. But Magic, you have to like round down to get him to 38. Jordan up to 38. He's got 85. But it's really necessary. It's the win shares. Jordan's got more win shares. He's got more win shares per 48. So really, that year, I like Jordan better than both of them. I do like Barkley over Magic as well. I do like Barkley over Magic as well, but I do like Jordan. And speaking of like what you said, when you talk about guys that are only leading their teams to like 50 wins, kind of reminds me because we touched on like that 97 MVP of Karl Malone, and I personally think the 97 and 98 MVP should switch. I think Jordan deserves 97. I think Malone deserves 98.
I agree.
Right. So I personally think they should switch. But in 97, when you watched the games, and really the most valuable person that was on a team that year looked way more valuable than anybody else, where the team just completely relied on him. And this is in 97 as well. It's Grant Hill. Nobody looked more valuable to a team in 97 than Grant Hill. He also led the Pistons to 54 wins that year, which the Pistons just weren't winning 50 plus games back then. But if you look at like what he did, and the team he had, and the guy, you know what I mean, there was just like nobody. It just looked like they struggled to score, they struggled to rebound, they struggled to pass, they struggled. It just looked like everything. It was just all on Hill. Now his stats like are eye popping. I mean 21, 9, and 7, but obviously much slower pace, things like that. But yeah, so that's where it really goes into the valuability too. Is I personally think a lot of these guys that are like on 7th, 8th seeds as well. And this goes back to like the Kobe argument and shit like that. They don't have the winning, but the valuability on it. So my question for you is on this, touching on this, like guys like Barkley, guys like Hill, why don't they get that same type of argument like a Kobe? because they were doing the exact same shit. I mean, they didn't average 35, but they were leading their team to more wins. Clearly they were the major reason. How come they don't get that same type of love and argument?
It's funny that you say that, because I've talked specifically today about this kind of argument, is that when we give an argument, right, and we talk about, let's just say LeBron. I think LeBron is very scrutinized in today's society, whether you like him or you don't. But when people bring up, let's just say 2011, and they say, well, he choked in the finals, and he had the team to go beat the Dallas Mavericks on paper, but we then don't bring up Kobe Bryant in the semifinals against Dallas in games 3 and 4 being outplayed by JJ Barea, Peja Stojakovic, and Jason Terry. That same exact team.
Different.
It's right.
Oh, no, it's different.
Right. And so it's like, for me, what I try to do is what I've been trying to do better is that understand both sides of the argument and do the research for both sides, because now I will understand, okay, yeah, LeBron didn't do well, but if you're a type of person to have Kobe Bryant top 3, when I bring that up of being a favorite out of the West with the best front court in the NBA at that time, and he doesn't show up, and I'm seeing Pau Gasol outplay him, I'm seeing Shannon Brown outplay him in an elimination game. Oh, he's hurt. Oh, that team, the Dallas Mavericks, were just better on paper than the Lakers. No, the fuck they weren't. And it's the goalpost moving that I find incredibly irritating in today's NBA, because people don't know the other side, and when you do bring it up, it's, oh, that's a bad mark on somebody who I want to promote, so it's different. But going back to the question at hand, it's because I don't think somebody like a Barkley has those significant moments, and it's like, people, again, and I've made this claim before, people are lazy, so they don't want to do their research, they don't want to go and rewatch the games, and it's not tangible for them to make the arguments for somebody who can be as valuable as somebody else for a team. But it's just not happening right now.
Well, I will say this too, because one of my biggest regrets in life is I'd love to take my mindset, go back in my younger body, and make sports betting, just knowing things, just off the top of the head. The biggest bets I'd ever like to make was Douglas over Tyson, Rockman over Lewis. The Rams in '99, as soon as Trent Green gets injured in the first preseason game, my God, I think that would probably win me the most money. But the one that I would really, really want to do is, I'd want to bet, and I've asked everybody this, and especially in 2011, I go, dude, if I would have bet you Mavericks in 4, I said, how much would you have been willing to bet? Like, that means if Mavericks win in 5, I lose. Mavericks win in 6, and you know what I mean? Anything other than 4, how much do you think I would have won? Because I think that would be the biggest basketball bet of all time. I personally think that, because nobody had, just to let you know, and at the time, Vegas had the Lakers basically at a 4-1 favorite on. Yep. So people, when I tell them that, people shit on me. They go, they try to argue with it, and they go, Vegas doesn't know everything. I go, I'm not saying they know everything. What I'm trying to say is they make their money off being right, and they make a shitload of money off being right. So if they put them at 4-1 odds, the Mavericks were clearly not the better team on paper. You know what I mean? If it was close, if it was a negative 120 as a favorite or something like that, cool, whatever. But it was a negative 370. You know what I mean? Even after they lost game 1, they still expected the Lakers to win and then all that. And they still expect to win after game 2 and all that. So that's what I mean. It's just, it wasn't that. Don't get me wrong. 1 through 12, like guys that could come in and play 15 minutes a game, the Mavs probably did. But when you started looking at the top, no, it was supposed to be them. Kobe was supposed to be better than Dirk. Pau was supposed to be better than whoever the fuck you want to say their second best player was. That's what I'm saying. They don't even have a definitive second best player.
Right. I argue, like, the second best player to me, Butler, gets hurt midway through the season. So it's a collective group. It's Peja, it's JJ Barea, and it's Terry in those playoffs. So it's like,
Well, see, I would
again,
argue it's either. I would argue it's somewhere between Kidd, Chandler, Terry, and Marion.
and I can get behind that, but at least
Mhm.
for like scoring second option, I think Butler
Yeah.
was the scoring second option. That's why I said that. But you're
Oh yeah,
in terms of
yeah.
valuability.
No. I'm talking about after Butler went down because, like, to me, the best player and just
Mhm.
watching him hound the shit out of him was to me in that second round. Kidd was their second best player because of the defense he was playing on Kobe.
Right, right. So I'm with that, but it's again the expectations of just having both sides. But if we kind of want to chug along here, because I only really made a list or a group of names, and we won't get through all of them, but just a group of names post 81, because I mentioned before that that's when 81 was the first year that people like the narrative was more media, the media was voting for it and stuff like that. And where I have trouble, me
Well, wait,
personally,
before we get into post 81, do you have like a huge grievance pre 81 with the players? Like, what would you say was the biggest one to you,
no,
or do you have?
and that's no, and that's where I was gonna talk about is that it's very hard to have this revisionist history and say that fellow peers of these NBA guys were wrong, but I think for me that I could maybe pick 1 or 2 years, and
Okay.
that's why I try to do everything past 81. But there's 1 or 2 years where I think it should have been flipped, specifically with McAdoo and Kareem, and
Okay.
it's not, and it's just more for like raw statistical production with McAdoo
Hmm.
and Kareem. But again, it's like if I'm going to tell a player who's in the NBA now and say that your opinion is wrong and you're playing against, a LeBron or a Steph Curry or stuff like that and say, well, my opinion is right because I'm watching it compared to you playing it. It's to me, I think that's where it just kind of falls short because that's the opinionated argument. But when you're physically playing against other players and you're valuing what they're bringing to the table on the team because you're having to play against them, that's where I try to be like, well, I can't just say you're wrong because you're physically playing against them.
Well, here's the caveat I would add. Okay, so and this didn't happen like this, and I'm so glad it didn't because this just proves a different thing. So Russell has more MVPs than Wilt. Okay,
Right.
and Wilt, obviously has better statistics. Okay, so if they were giving the MVP to Russell and he wasn't winning, that's where I have an issue with it. But since he was backing it up by winning, then I can't argue it. So I do like when the players tell me that Kobe's better than LeBron, and I go, I don't cool. So he's better, right? But it results in nothing but less.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand where the better comes in. Oh, it's just the mindset. The mindset resulted in less. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? I don't
Mm-hmm.
want that mindset if it results in less. So that's where I lose it on the players. I'd like to have, if they ever want to sit and do it, and they probably don't, the debate on it and things like that. But so that's the problem that I have where the players do it and stuff like that. Like there's a few of them that really stand out to me, but then it goes back to the winning art. Like for example, 1970, by all accounts, Jerry West is the MVP of the league. You know
Right.
what I mean? He's got better win shares, more win shares. His stats are better than Willis Reed. Willis Reed leads him to a title, so I can't argue. Willis Reed's stats were cool, you know what I mean, and he ended up winning the title. I can't argue that. One of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
jumps to me was the '73 MVP. But once again, the Celtics won 68 games that year. But if you look
Mm-hmm.
at like what Cowens and Jabbar did, Jabbar's got legendary win shares per 48 minutes, right? I'm a big 48 per 48, especially when you're playing a lot of minutes. Because, like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, that '06 season, Nash is playing 35 minutes, Kobe's playing 42 minutes. An extra 6-7 minutes a game is going to affect your stats more. They're
Right.
both still playing a good amount of minutes, but like you look at like the Jabbar thing. Jabbar's 30, 16, and 5, Cowan's 21, 16, and 4. They don't keep the blocks, then we know Jabbar's getting more blocks and all that. He's shooting
Right.
55%, Cowan's shooting 45. He's got almost double the amount of win shares. He just doesn't have John Havlicek and JoJo White and Paul Westphal and just all these great players.
Right. Right.
That's part of
And
the thing. So I mean, that's one of the ones that stuck out to me. So like by the numbers, if we're doing that, like 70 is Jerry West, 73, I think is whatchamacallit is Kareem. Those are some of the more egregious ones to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're the only two. Like I said, the only two that I would have switched was McAdoo and Kareem. But if you're going with Jerry and I'm sorry, who'd you say for 73 again? I'm sorry.
Oh, well, 73 is Jabbar over Cowens. Jabbar over Cowens is much more. Like I said, I can't argue West over Reed because I'm a slave to win. So Reed led him to a title. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
but I'm just saying, if it was truly regular season, like we really claim it is, but we all know it isn't, you know what I mean? Then it's West over Reed.
This is a perfect segue because I want to talk about this the most is fraudulent MVPs, undeserving guys that if we're predecessing to winning, if you have Jerry West in 1970, I can't argue that. But if we want to go and keep it post 81, who are some guys in some races to where you think are most notably stick out to you that think like, all right, yeah, I have no idea why this guy won MVP compared to the other guy or who came in third or fourth. You mentioned Jordan over Malone earlier, but who are some other guys all time that you think like, how the hell did this guy win?
Well, I'm still confused, and I mean I think I know why it came down to it, but I mean I don't know how Dr. J got the MVP in '81 over Kareem, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't get that at all, and they ultimately the Lakers won the title and not the I'm sorry, the Celtics won the title that year in '81.
Yeah,
so I mean the Dr. J didn't win the title year, but Kareem's getting more points, he's getting more rebounds, he's getting about assists less, more blocks, he's got more steals, he's getting what he's getting that year. He's 26 points a game on 57% shooting. He's got more win shares. I just don't think. I think Dr. J. It was like, well, shit, he's been in the league in a while. He's Dr. J. He needs an MVP, and that's the very first year of the media, and so it looks like they really tried to push the narrative of Dr. J. And everybody loved Dr. J too. You know what I mean? He was a media favorite. He was a fan favorite. So it's not like he was one of those assholes. And Kareem, by all accounts, was an asshole. And it's not necessarily he was an asshole. Maybe he was just aloof and all that. And he talked about in his documentary his dad, who his dad was kind of stoic. And I think his dad was a cop, and he got a lot of respect or whatever. And especially growing up that age, as a black man and all that kind of stuff, a lot of black people didn't get respect. So he thought that's how you had to act to garner respect. So he said that influenced his behavior too. But yeah, so there's one right there. I don't think Dr. J deserved it over. And be honest with you, I don't think he deserved it over Bird either. But you know what I mean. But especially Kareem. I think Kareem came in third that year. Which one do you want to give me? And then we'll keep going.
So one, I guess more recent, I think the most egregious one, because we talk about him, or young people talk about him changing the game, is the year before Steph won the unanimous MVP. He won his first MVP in 2015. The guy who came in second, James Harden, I think just completely outperformed him. I think it's other than win shares per 48, and I think they're relatively close. That's something I have to relook up. More points, more rebounds, more assists, shooting better. Other than, I think 3-point percentage is comparable. Maybe Steph that's one of his 50, 40, 90 years or close to it. But his free throw percentage is, I believe, comparable, even though Steph's a great free throw percentage guy. Is that even though Steph was part of that 60-win team, James Harden was still part of I believe a 55+ win team. So even though it's not that
56, the Warriors won 67.
Okay, so even he's not reaching the mark of 60 wins. He's reaching the mark over 55. So there's at least a better, a somewhat chance of him getting to the title that year. And obviously that didn't happen. But if I'm just looking at raw production and specifically how a person is revolving around a system with Mike D'Antoni and James Harden, I think James Harden that year is more valuable to the Rockets because, again, we go by on-off numbers, we can go by raw production, and I remember that that system up to that point, it just could not function without James Harden. That's why they eventually went and got Russell Westbrook so they could relieve the responsibilities of James Harden. Obviously, that didn't work. Chris Paul, that almost worked, but again, if we're talking about this is like starting to be peak James Harden, it's a very weird year for Steph. 24, I think 4 and 5 or something like that. If you have the numbers right in front of you, I forget, but I know it was under 24 points. James Harden's just gapping him in a lot of the efficiency.
Well, not efficiency. Steph's better than him in all the efficiency metrics, but he's got him on raw numbers and all
Box
that.
score.
Yeah. But he's also playing 4 more minutes a game as well. I don't have nearly as much problem with it because, like I said, the 67 win teams, and he was the best player on the title team. So with that being said, I don't have a problem with it. I had much more of a problem with him getting it over LeBron because it just showed you how valuable LeBron was because that team couldn't do shit in Cleveland. And then it showed you how valuable he was in the playoffs too, because I mean, Love and Kyrie were injured, not just in the finals, they were injured, in other rounds as well. And he's sweeping teams. He's sweeping teams that won 60 games.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so to me, like if anybody would have an argument, it'd be more so LeBron than Harden or whatever. But the one that really, really stood out to me, and even stood out to me in the moment, and I was just, and I know the media narrative of it was 01. Shaq was by far the MVP. It wasn't Iverson. It was never Iverson. You know what I mean? I don't give a fuck. Iverson won the MVP. They each won 56 fucking games. Shaq won it in the Harder Conference. Iverson averaged 2 more points, and he shot 15% worse from the fucking field. You know what I mean? He averaged 4 rebounds and 5 assists. Shaq got you 13 rebounds. So Shaq's getting almost the same amount of assists as you. You know what I mean? He's fucking killing you in rebounds. He's he's leading the team to winning. He averages 35 and 15 in that finals, I think, something like the 34 and 15, something like that. I don't remember if he averages like 33 and a half, I want to say. But anyways, yeah, so that's really one of the more, that was like the first one that really stood out to me because, and I hate the Lakers. I hated the Lakers. I wasn't rooting for the Lakers and rooting for them every round to lose. So it's not that, but clearly Shaq was by far more valuable than Iverson ever was. So what's your assessment on that?
No, I agree. And it's funny in doing this because like trying to go by voting, I think we can say that there's probably some years that Michael Jordan should have probably won a unanimous MVP, but by voting specifically, Shaq lost unanimous MVP the year prior to Allen by having one voter vote for Allen Iverson the year before.
He came in 7th too. Iverson.
He came in 7th.
Yeah.
Right, and that's I think it's like out of
that
doing all the
vote, he would have been lower.
Right, exactly. He would have been barely to top 10 or maybe even like top 15. But regardless, it's I find that very, very funny because it completely skews and completely screws out of unanimous MVP where we talked on episodes before where we're talking about unanimous MVPs and there should have been several. Shaq should have been definitely one of them. And Allen Iverson screwing him over the year prior, I think it's funny. But in 01, to answer your point, I think it definitely should have been Shaq. And he's definitely gone on record, obviously, later in the years. We talked about Nash earlier. He was saying that he deserved them and so on and so forth. I don't necessarily agree with that. But in the turn of the century, again, best player on best team, winning championships, you can't argue the playoff stats because he's just dominating everybody. So for at least a 3 or 4 year time, Shaq should have probably gotten 4 and at least 1 unanimous for sure.
Well, hold on. I want to say this about the Shaq thing, okay? Because this has always irritated me with Shaq. First off, multiple things irritate me with it. One, the 28 and 15, right? He says Nash stole 2 MVPs over him, right? Over him averaging 28 and 15. One, both of those years he wasn't averaging 28 and 15. Okay, that's one.
But he never.
Secondly, he never once averaged 28 and 15. That's what makes it even worse. So that's another thing. Third, that second MVP, right? Like if you want to have an argument for the first MVP, you have a much better argument than the second. Okay, but the second MVP, you're 20 points, you're 9 rebounds, you miss 59, you miss 23 games. You're 29. Your team wins 50 wins. You're on that. As far as the first one goes, you took a 42-win team that went to the second round to 59 wins in the conference finals. Nash took a 29-win team to 62 wins and the conference finals. He just showed that he made a better gap, bigger gap. That's where that is. You put up better numbers. I'm with that. Cool. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. So certainly don't say him. And when we get to stealing, this is where it really upsets me about Shaq saying this shit. Did you ever see that show Shaq had called Shaq Versus?
I actually have not. Please indulge me.
Okay. So Shaq Versus, he would go around, he would go to Ben Roethlisberger and they'd throw footballs and compete in football. He'd go to other athletes and compete against them in their sport. Okay. That's what he did. Now, how he ended up getting that show is Steve Nash told him about. Steve Nash wanted to do that, and he told him about that on the bus. So Shaq stole the idea from him, so much so that he had to give Steve Nash an executive producer credit, where Nash wasn't even involved with the show, and he still got paid off of it.
That's so tough. I never knew that.
So the balls to say you stole shit when you clearly stole shit.
Right. Unbelievable. I never know. That's funny. I never knew that.
Hey, that's some Hoopstorian knowledge for you.
That's awesome. I love that. I do want to mention at least one or two more seasons because
I got 2 seasons and then I got one kind of toss up season. I understand both.
And for my toss up, because that's where I wanted to go to next for me was 03 and Duncan and KG. And again, as I mentioned before in the previous episodes, I'm a Spurs fan, so I will fight for Timmy till the day I die. But my fandom, why I became a fan of the NBA, is because of KG. And again, if I look at numbers and situation, KG at that time was not in a great situation. Obviously, getting bounced in the first round will definitely impact what at least you will think about his MVP type year. But for me, it's where do we kind of stand of all right, I understand that he's getting bounced in the first round because his organization isn't putting great production around him compared to another organization who's doing whatever they can to give Tim Duncan as much help as possible.
So, how can we put this? I'm one of the people where I don't give a shit how shitty your organization is. If you're not getting it done, you're not winning at an elite level, a high level, it just kind of is what it is. You know what I mean? I don't know what to tell you. Publicly shame your organization. I don't know. Because there was the Joe Smith deal where they had lost all their draft picks for a while too, because they secretly signed Joe Smith to a contract under the table. And so there's that. I tell everybody Kevin Garnett is just as good as player in 03 as he is in 04 when he wins the title, when he wins the MVP. He just didn't have the team around him. I once again, I have no problem with 03 Duncan winning because, like I said, he ultimately led his team to a title. He put on one of the greatest postseason runs ever, one of the best finals ever. So I don't have that. If we're doing Duncan, I would say Kidd has more of an argument in 02 than Garnett has an argument in 03 because of what, Kidd literally doubled his teams in wins. And that's one of those points where we go into the quantum physics game about basketball, the quantum entanglement, quantum mechanic, the quantum vector points, that they superposition where they affect each other, where there's this collective consciousness in it. I don't want to go too deep into it. It's not different, but I'm just saying there's a point there where Kidd now is affecting his team so much. And it's just one of those, that's where the eye test, they're just running harder. They're just playing harder. They're winning double amount the games. So I don't have a problem with 03. If we're going to do a Spurs one that I personally have a problem with, it's Russell Westbrook over Kawhi Leonard at 17.
Yes. I will say that to the cows come home. Kawhi deserved 2017, and everybody puts 2017 on such a fucking pedestal. And I have to talk to these idiots every single day saying, well, Russell Westbrook averages triple-double. Cool. He averaged a triple-double for the next several seasons. He wasn't even in MVP talks. So how valuable is an MVP who is averaging a triple-double? Because now officially that MVP is done. And again, I'm going on a tangent. I apologize. But now definitively there's only been one out of I believe 7, maybe 6 times in
Hold on.
NBA
He averaged
history.
a triple double in 17, 18, 19.
18,
With there
19.
no 20, and then he might average a triple double again in 21. I'm not sure.
I think
But
it
so
was
he
4.
either
I think it
three
was
or
4.
four. Yeah, I know he did it for 3 years straight. So he either had 3 or 4.
Yeah.
We'll just say 4 for the sake of argument. 4,
Right.
four. He did it for 4 years, and maybe somebody in the chat will know. But he did it for 4 years, and then Jokic has got 1, and Oscar's got 1. So there's 6 years.
Yeah. So
5 or 6.
one. Yeah. So one time in NBA history that somebody won an MVP by doing a triple double. So in totality, and there was even players again pre-81 who was voting against Oscar Robertson about the valuability, and obviously people voting against Jokic now are talking about valuability. So the triple double argument, I think, is extremely weak. Because if you look at it, Russell Westbrook in 2017 had a bottom 3 contest rate for defenders in the NBA. The only people he was above was Rudy Gobert and Hassan Whiteside. You all know that they're interior defenders. So by that logic, he is now the worst perimeter defender, and that show kind of goes to the stats of he wasn't trying to contest shots. What was he doing? He was going to try to get rebounds. He was trying to stat pad and try to get the triple double. So it again, it just angers me. I think Kawhi definitely should have won it in 2017.
Well, yeah, and then two, what you think is like, so the raw numbers at Kawhi is 26, 6 and 4, but with way better defense, way better defense. But then it's once you really get into the advanced numbers too, you look at the splits, Kawhi is what, 49, 38, 88, Westbrook's 43, 34, 85. Kawhi's got better win shares. He's got a higher, win shares per 48. He led his team to 61 wins. That team won 47 wins. That team, that's one of the great what if, and we kind of just brush it off or whatever. I wish Zaza Pachulia didn't step on his foot. I would love to see what would have came of this. Ultimately, I'm gonna say I just think the Warriors had too much firepower, but that's why you play the game. And from the sample size that we saw, Kawhi was kicking the shit out of him. Matter of fact, I was so interested. I remember I turned it into game 1, like in the third quarter when they were up by like 20, because I just didn't care because it just looked like they were going to mop them. And then I was like, damn, they're kicking the shit out of them. You know what I mean? And then next thing you know, a few plays later, Zaza injures his leg. It's just, never really the same again. So that's one of the big grievances I have. I think Kawhi definitely deserves 2017 more than any other. Another big grievance I got is I think LeBron deserves 2011 over Derrick Rose. And when LeBron shut Derrick Rose down in the playoffs, and Derrick Rose shot 6% against LeBron, I think that's the end of the argument right there.
Mm-hmm.
Agree? Pushback?
So because I'm with your criteria, because in postseason specifically, there's no argument that it would be LeBron over Derrick Rose, because he is quite literally shutting the MVP down in a finite amount of series. Where I won't defend, but at least I'll understand it to an extent, is that throughout that season, they were I think they were one of the only teams that have a winning record against the Heat, and that their role players were outplaying the Heat's role players in the regular season. So by if it is a quote unquote regular season award, the Heat the Heat were just definitively losing against the Bulls. Now, if we're bringing it into the postseason, obviously the more experienced, well-versed championship level team with D Wade and Udonis Haslem, with LeBron, who hasn't won yet, and Chris Bosh that hasn't won yet, were able to get over the hump and take out the definitive MVP and crew. So I won't argue that. I think that LeBron probably it's very tough for me because I've been trying to do this kind of self-reflection of that season a lot recently, and I'm starting to get behind. I do understand why Derrick Rose got it, but it's just a weird feeling. Like I do want to say LeBron should have won it because of the postseason, the stats and everything like that, but I can't. It's one of those things where I'm like.
Let me ask you this much: do you think they knew that these two guys, because LeBron had better stats across the board too, right? Derrick Rose won 4 more games, so I mean, like I said, in the moment, they got the best record in the league. He wins the MVP. Like I said, I understand the argument. But with that being said, do you think they still would have voted for him knowing that LeBron was going to hold him to 6% shooting in the playoffs? I couldn't vote for him. I would be. That's not an MVP. No MVP should be held to 6%.
And that's extremely fair. But I think I think what their excuse would be, and I'm not an advocate for excuses, but I think the rationale would be, well, the kid's 21, so of course he's probably going to be shooting 6% against well, at that time probably one of the better defenders and one of the best, greatest players of all time up to that point, because the kid is 21 and he's still learning how to win. Because obviously we couldn't go and say, well, by year two, having being the number one seed in 2012 and him getting hurt and so on and so forth. So I understand where you're coming from, but I think that at least the rationale would be the kid's young, the kid will learn how to win, he'll get over the hump just like how all these other great other players did.
I hate that excuse. I hate he's the young excuse. He's the MVP. You should never, there's never no, he's a certain age if you're the MVP. You know what I mean? Now, if you're a rookie and you're not showing up and you're developed, like, oh, he's young, he'll develop, blah, blah, blah. No, if you're the MVP, then the age doesn't matter. You're the MVP fucking P.
Yeah, and I think that's where, like, at least to me, where my internal battle is, like, I think that they probably did get it wrong because they're obviously youngest MVP ever and so on and so forth. So he becomes the what if because of the knee and so on and so forth. But if you're setting the precedent of, okay, you can be 20, 21, 22 years old, winning MVP, and being the most valuable player in your league, why haven't we then seen it thereafter? And I think now they're straying away to where, like, all right, you have to be, and not, they obviously don't have an age limit. That's not what I'm saying. But they're gearing it towards people who are more in their, like, athletic prime
or established.
Or established players because of what happened thereafter.
Right, because Derrick Rose is going to be, not going to be, because I don't know, because like I'm conflicted on this. But if it happens, and there's a good chance it might happen, Derrick Rose will be the first ever player with an MVP not in the Hall of Fame.
I think he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer.
Right, but I'm just saying, but I could see, once you reach the MVP, I could see that alone getting him into the Hall of Fame for some people. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, he peaked higher than anything Tony Kukoc ever did, and Tony Kukoc is in the Hall of Fame. Casey Jones, things like that. So, I don't know. Real quick, this is my last one, and then we're going to bounce from here. But the toss-up one is 08, Kobe and Chris Paul. I'm really cool with either one getting it. If I ultimately had to lean to it, I would go Chris Paul. But, you know what I mean? I don't have no problem. But, yeah, it's a toss-up for me. How do you feel about
it? I think I would lean towards Chris Paul. But, again, I think that's one of those rare ones where they wouldn't be able to get it wrong. I do understand both sides. I think, again, in terms of valuability, because obviously going forward, Chris Paul is affecting every single team wherever he lands. The Clippers, OKC, the Rockets, obviously other than the Warriors and the Spurs now because of his advanced age. But when I think in terms valuable, I think specifically Chris Paul, because he is, wherever he goes, he's giving them franchise records and wins. He's giving people who are definitive, not all NBA players whatsoever, into all NBA talks, getting them to all-star games, and is affecting his teammates to a greater level. So when I think about valuability as a person, it's Chris Paul, and it's not even close with anybody else.
Well, there's a real secret if you want to be valuable and make your team better, okay? And I know scoring gets all the love and all that, right? But if you really want to be valuable to a team and you want to affect the collective consciousness, and this is why Carmelo Anthony always drug down his fucking teams, is play defense and pass the ball. If you play defense and pass the ball, nobody will have a problem with you. Carmelo Anthony did neither. Chris Paul does both.
Yep.
And that's it. So anyways, on that note, we're out. We'll check y'all tomorrow. We'll check y'all next week. We'll be back then and worse than ever, per usual. Let me find a little outro video. All right.
Canada.
Put on a suit, drink water, don't drink and drive. Hey man, call your mother.
It means nothing. It means nothing.
Nah, they lying to you. It's about the money.
Now you're more fluent.